Where it's a real pleasure to have with us Fred Krupp, who's the president of the Environmental Defense Fund, a position or an organization he's led for the last 3 decades. I must have started very young to judge from things. He's a very widely recognized leader in the international environmental community. He's been a leading voice in climate change and how we respond to that as a global society. Been a very eloquent champion of advocating for the power of the marketplace in dealing with climate change. He was the co-author with Miriam Horn of a New York Times bestseller back in 2008 called Earth, the Sequel, The Race to Reinvent Energy and Stop Global Warming. Among other achievements, he's, I think, had a major impact in leading a focus on methane emissions in our natural gas system and trying to make natural gas a more beneficial fuel for reducing our carbon footprint in the near term. Led a series of innovative corporate engagements with EDF, FedEx, KKR, McDonald's, Walmart, among others. He has his degrees from Yale and from the University of Michigan Law School. He was named one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report and was recipient of the 2015 William K. Riley Environmental Leadership Award. He's done lots of great things for our environment, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Fred Krupp to the podium.
You know, 195 nations got together, developed and developing, North and South, sworn enemies among them, and they pledged to address one of the greatest challenges we've ever faced. Last December, at an old airport just north of Paris, the nations of the world took a big step forward to address climate change and reduce the emissions and set up a process for the even deeper cuts that we all know are surely necessary. The world rightly celebrated Paris, but we can only afford to celebrate for so long. Given the urgency of our task, we must quickly turn our attention to what happens next. And that's the question I want to address this afternoon. But before we turn to that question, standing here, I'm reminding that someone once said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, I'm definitely in the right place. So thanks for inviting me, both Bob and Martha Broad, and I'm particularly glad to be here at MIT, not just because there are so many brilliant engineers and scholars and scientists, all that intellectual firepower, because also so much of it is aimed in the right direction. I've been told that the MIT Energy Club has 3,000, maybe 4,000 members and is one of the most active organizations on campus. Over 400 events last year. And it truly makes me feel more optimistic about our future. So let's talk about that future, specifically what we need to make happen next to aggressively address climate change. And since it's campaign season, let me use a political analogy. Paris was like an election. The world voted for climate change, but now comes the challenge of governing, implementing those plans and promises. If the commitments from Paris are the catalyst for a dramatic shift toward clean energy, as I think they will be, we are on our way to one of our greatest successes in the history of humankind. But if the nations only go through the motions or consider the Paris targets to be the end of their work, well, then we're in deep trouble. In the coming months and years, each nation will face that choice. And today, to help us understand which path we'll choose, I'd like to talk about what I consider the three most important questions we face as we work to dramatically reduce the pollution that powers our economy. One, what is the status of climate progress here in the United States, the world's largest economy and the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gas pollution sitting up there in the atmosphere, and the most influential nation on Earth? Two, China, the new #1 emitter in terms of current emissions. Are they now mostly part of the problem or mostly part of the solution? And finally, three, for all the progress we've made, we don't yet have a comprehensive solution in place. So what would smart policy look like? Let's start by looking at what's really happening on the ground here in the United States. Clean energy, once considered as exotic as a mission to Mars, has really taken off. Where environmentalists like me used to stand up in places like this and talk about the potential or the promise of clean energy, now we need only point to the numbers. And here's a few. In 2010, 20% of the new power sources constructed was from renewable sources. In 2015, nearly 60%. And this year, the number will be even higher. For the first time ever, utility-scale solar projects will add more capacity to the nation's grid in 2016 than any other type of source. We'll add a total of 100 gigawatts of new renewables from 2016 through 2021. That's the equivalent of about 80 large coal-fired power plants. There are now far more jobs in the solar energy industry than in coal mining, and the new growth in solar jobs has topped 20% year over year for each of the last 3 years. And for those who think renewable energy is just a liberal coastal thing, the Texas wind industry is living up to that state's reputation for thinking big. At its peak on an evening last month, wind energy provided 45% of the electricity demand on the major grid in Texas. The momentum toward clean energy, driven by market demand, government investment, and yes, tax policy, and the needed clean air health standards, that momentum, in my view, is unstoppable. Now, none of this means that we can just let the problem take care of itself. To cut pollution as much as climate scientists tell us we need to, we have to do a lot more, and we have to do it faster. And I'll touch on how we can do that in a bit. Now, I know some people will point to the recent Supreme Court stay of the Clean Power Plan and ask if all of this progress is at risk. And there's no question that that case is important. But I don't think it's not quite what it may seem to the casual observer. The Supreme Court's decision was not a ruling on the substance of EPA's plan. They said, in effect, that as the courts consider the underlying substance, EPA should pause implementing the rule. Not a good thing, because there's an urgent need to move quickly, but not a setback on the merits. And since EPA was extremely careful to build this plan on rock-solid science and legal foundation, and because the Supreme Court has ruled 3 times that EPA has the authority and responsibility to limit greenhouse gas pollution, I'm confident the plan will be upheld on the merits. Part of the reason that it's so important that we move forward with the Clean Power Plan is that it's the reason we got past decades of inaction on climate and were able to reach this historic agreement in Paris. The long international stalemate was due to a large extent by the world's view that the United States was not willing to help solve the problem. So the Clean Power Plan is very much the foundation of our global success, and the eyes of the world are very much on this legal case. Before I move on, let me address the elephant in the room. And by that, I mean that in the most bipartisan way. Many are asking what will happen after this election. I don't want to dismiss the importance of that question because, of course, elections have enormous consequences. And the United States is on a path we're on because of elections. And the dramatic turnaround we've seen in the Canadian climate policy was driven, in large part, by the election of Prime Minister Trudeau. But I believe the American people will not stand for turning back to the era of dirtier energy and unlimited carbon pollution. They'll not accept the idea of abandoning the progress we've made. 2/3 of the American people support the Clean Power Plan, and 2/3 support the U.S. commitment to the Paris Agreement. Those are supermajorities, and yet even higher numbers support more clean energy deployment. A Gallup poll in early March showed that concern about climate change in the United States is at an 8-year high. In the longer term, I believe the need for clean energy, which already has tremendous bipartisan appeal, will become even more of a national consensus. Here's a raw political statistic that should impress even the most jaded observer. There are now more utility-scale solar or wind installations in Republican congressional districts than in Democratic ones. And nothing is more important to politicians than their constituents' jobs. To make progress on climate change, the United States must lead with action. But as many have observed correctly, that if China doesn't join us, we can never achieve the goals we have to as a planet. As I noted, China is now the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and their energy demand may double over the next 20 years. So the actions of our Pacific partner are central to this challenge. And that's why I was so encouraged when Presidents Obama and Xi made their joint announcement in November of 2014. China, you'll remember, agreed then to peak its emission of greenhouse gases by around 2030 and to expand its use of non-fossil fuels to 20% of the nation's energy mix. Now, the U.S. and China commitments both were not strong enough, certainly not strong enough to stop global warming, but they did mark an inflection point, the end of this era of finger-pointing, the end of the blame game, and the beginning of a ladder up in ambition and cooperation. A year later, President Xi committed to launching a national emissions trading program in 2017 for carbon. The movement by China may have surprised some, but not those of us at EDF. We've been working in China now for 25 years, and we served as advisors to the government as they developed the pilot carbon trading programs that are the foundation for the most recent policy announcement. We now are working closely with the Chinese government and key stakeholders to help support the government in China as it carefully makes its decisions on how to design this system. A policy change this big isn't going to happen overnight, but for those who are used to hearing the claim that America should enact until China does, that excuse is now emphatically erased. While they're still working to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty, China is making huge changes to its energy and climate policies. And they're acting because of national self-interest. I've never met a climate skeptic in Beijing. They understand there is no high carbon path to prosperity. And they know that the need to clean up conventional air pollution from coal and cars is choking their cities. I'm very pleased that the 13th five-year plan, just released, which runs from 2016 to 2020, has set up even more stringent targets for environmental protection. And on renewable power, they are, well, the China of renewable energy. Already the world's largest investor in renewables, they invested nearly $90 billion in clean energy in 2014. The United States, a larger economy, invested just over $50 billion. Given the challenge of bringing prosperity to 1.3 billion people and the 100-plus year head start the United States and Europe have had in industrialization, China's actions are a remarkable turnaround. The United States, China, and 193 other nations are now moving in the right direction. Earlier this month, for example, the leaders of the United States and Canada agreed to cooperate to cut methane emissions from their respective oil and gas sectors. Methane, as you know, is an extremely potent greenhouse gas responsible for about a quarter of the global warming we're now experiencing. Prime Minister Trudeau announced that Canada will reduce oil and gas methane emissions from 40 to 45% below 2012 levels by 2025, matching an earlier U.S. pledge, and he said he would drive toward this goal with standards that apply both to new and existing oil and gas infrastructure. President Obama committed for the first time to rapidly curb methane emissions from existing oil and gas facilities. It really was a watershed moment for North America climate action. That is very good. It's the start of work that begins to translate the promise of Paris into reality. Because I said at the beginning, Paris only matters if it's the start of a much larger transformation. So how will we get there? What policies will drive the change that science demands? For my money, the most important step we can take is to tackle the market failure that caused this problem in the first place. We need to change the game so that those who produce the pollution pay the cost, creating an incentive for a worldwide move toward clean energy. It's just economics 101. When it's free to pollute, you get a lot of pollution. When industry is accountable to limit their emissions and pay for their pollution, they'll have a bottom line incentive to find low carbon solutions. And investors, engineers, and entrepreneurs will accelerate the race to profit. Using this economic lever is critical because no one knows which technologies will move us to a low carbon future. Policymakers, politicians, and advocates all have ideas: solar power, fuel cells, new battery, but nobody knows as much as everybody. That is to say, no one in government or industry knows better than the collective wisdom of the market. Millions of investors and thousands of companies scrambling for profit in a world where discovering ways to power our economy more cleanly means a bigger financial return. What system should we use to ensure that companies pay for their pollution? The short answer is whatever works. Some, like my organization, have proposed a limit on emissions with a flexible system for trading that allows the market to find the cheapest ways to cut emissions. That's working in California and Europe. It's where China is going. And it stands to reason that finding the least expensive ways to cut pollution will allow the deep cuts we need to have the most public support. Others have suggested a tax on pollution, with the revenue going back to taxpayers or into clean energy investment. And there may be other creative approaches as well. What matters is making sure that whatever policy we choose delivers results, by which I mean guaranteed pollution reductions. After all, putting a cost on pollution may be the means we use, but it's not the end we seek. Reducing emissions is the real goal, and that is the primary test by which I will judge any policy proposal. So what's the bottom line of all this? Paris was big, But this challenge is bigger than any one agreement can solve. For all of our momentum, we need to press forward as hard and as fast as we can. We're trying to create change on a vast scale, something that only happens very rarely, transforming the way the world is powered. None of us know exactly which investments or innovations will get us to our goal, but I do know who will get us there. Because all of the policy development, all of the economic incentives, all of the political actions are ultimately aimed at one thing: giving engineers the resources to get the job done. The problem will be solved by some combination of new technology, new fuels, new processes, new deployment strategies. In other words, exactly the sort of thing that you do here. It's not flattery for me to say that there's a reasonable chance that once we've adjusted the market so it demands solutions, those solutions will be developed within a few hundred yards of where I stand, or at least by people who have been educated at places like MIT, Caltech, and Berkeley, and the other great engineering institutions. So, no pressure, but it's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. We have time for questions, and we have microphones here that we can bring to you. You can queue up by the microphones. Feel free to come up. While we're waiting, I have a question about the developing world. So you spoke a lot about the U.S. and China. What about a place like India or countries on the continent of Africa? What do you think will happen there with all the coal resource, for example, in India, which they're likely to use as they grow their economy?
I'm hardly an expert about India, but I do think it's another huge nation whose future is very important. Its future emissions are very important. I think the sort of air pollution problems that exist now in India are going to move them also to clean energy, as well as the opportunities ultimately to profit from lower carbon solutions in a world that creates more incentives for them.
My name is George Mokray. I'm an independent scholar from Central Square. Everything you talked about was emissions. That's only half of the system. The other half is sinks. And here at MIT, people talk about carbon sequestration and storage on an industrial basis and geoengineering. But there's a recent scientific tome called Geotherapy, Innovative Methods of Soil Fertility Restoration, Carbon Sequestration, and Reversing CO2 Increase. And in this book, there are a number of measures that are available for the smallest, agricultural, forestry, all of these different techniques that are available. And I wish you would talk, and I wish everybody, when they talk about climate change, would not only talk about emissions, but also talk about sinks, and talk about sinks beyond the kind of industrial carbon sequestration and storage, and more on the level of geotherapy.
Point well taken. That is a significant omission in my presentation, and I appreciate you bringing it up. One of the advantages of a system that not only puts a cost on emissions, but pays a cost to those who can sequester carbon in the soil or in trees, is that you have an incentive not only to lower emissions, but to soak them up, and we have to do both. And we could get perhaps a gigaton or two from managing agricultural lands in a different way. And one of the promises in India is we are working with farmers, and we've gotten a new startup airline, not so small anymore, Indigo, to donate or pay several $1 million, which goes to very small-scale farmers who are figuring out how to sequester carbon in soil or plants. Now, the rub is we've got to be scientifically absolutely rigorous, relentlessly rigorous, in order to make sure that these offsets have integrity. But once you satisfy that test, it would be foolish to ignore the other half of the equation, as I'm guilty of. Thank you for pointing it out.
Hi, my name's Nathan Macher, and one of the challenges with building a clean energy infrastructure is that the process for environmental review can take a decade, and there's no one in charge who says, okay, enough environmental review has been done. And that allows various interest groups who aren't really concerned with the environment to enter and just delay the project. Is perhaps having someone say, hey, there's been enough environmental review after like a year or two instead of a decade, is that a worthwhile policy to pursue?
Yes and no. Yes, reviews should be substantive and purposeful, but I can guarantee you that our government, let alone others, have pursued a lot of really stupid projects that are wasteful and enormously environmentally bad. So you absolutely need the review process, and that's why NEPA and the other laws were put into effect. Congress recently passed a law to streamline some of the review process. I haven't had a chance to study it myself, but you might want to take a look. It was back in back in December with the budget resolution. So take a look at that, and you may see some of the reforms that speed up the process. I hope when I take a look at it, I'm going to continue to see the protections in place as well. But yesterday there was a new transmission line approved, and there's a series of new papers that suggests that new transmission high voltage capacity is going to be part of the answer to moving clean renewable energy around the country. So I empathize with what you're saying, that projects like that need to be reviewed, but not endlessly, because there's going to be some new infrastructure we need to create a low-carbon world.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Tim Havel. I'm a alum, former employee, and MIT spin-off all at once, so in clean tech. One quick comment, which is just to point out that an estimated up to 19% of CO2 emissions are believed to be related to land use degradation right now. So indeed, it's a lot to be done that probably doesn't take very much deep science in order to see what's going on in that area. But anyway, my question pertains to a report that the Sierra Club recently released called A Dirty Deal, How the Trans-Pacific Partnership Threatens Our Climate. And a case in point, TransCanada recently brought a $15 billion suit against the United States because President Obama canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, a task of which I had some small part, being the action lead for the Credo Ran Other 98 pledge of resistance to the Keystone XL pipeline here in the Boston area. My question then is, did the EDF have a representative at these trade negotiations? If so, why is the word climate change not mentioned anywhere in the now published, tardily published text of the agreement? Or if not, why not? And aren't you concerned?
Trade is really important to the economic system of our country and our planet, and it can have effects for good or for bad. And there hasn't been enough integration of environmental considerations into the trade agreements. EDF did not work on that trade agreement, so we didn't have a representative, because I've come to realize in running EDF over the years that if you try to do too many things, you end up doing nothing. So trade is really important, but we left that to others to work on. Ultimately, I think some sort of trade sanctions will be important to get all of the nations to meet ambitious goals in reducing their greenhouse gas pollution. And there is nothing like that in any of the trade agreements yet, so there's work to be done.
It might also be pointed out that whereas the Paris Accords don't have any enforcement mechanism, these trade agreements have some very tough ones.
All right, thank you for your speech. So I'm just wondering, we're talking about moving to renewable energy, more and more clean energy sources. What do you think is the future of nuclear power in all of that, and sort of the near term as we're shifting to better technologies?
I think we're going to learn a lot about nuclear power from China, because China, has over 30 plants planned, and my understanding is more than a dozen currently under construction. My own view is that it would be, we used the word folly before, maybe we'll repeat it because my vocabulary is limited.
It's okay, you're at MIT, words aren't our thing.
We can't take any carbon-free source of energy off the table when we're talking about an existential threat like climate change. So, of course, the energy source is going to have to come in terms of safety, proliferation, cost. And right now, I'm not sure any of the technologies do, but I say, let's see what happens in China in terms of cost, safety, and I think we may learn a lot. So I think, I am, and I think the environmental community needs to be open-minded about nuclear power, but of course, we're going to absolutely need to be sure, that it meets criteria to be used. But if it does, why wouldn't we take a source that's carbon-free off the table when we're in deep trouble?
Thank you.
At the 2009 Copenhagen Convention, there was a commitment on the part of the developed countries to provide $100 billion in assistance to the developing world for new types of energy sources. But there's been no further progress either at Paris or anywhere else in coming up with any specific proposals. There's actually been attempts to count current various forms of assistance within that sum. And in addition to that, there was also a promise, a rather vague one, to compensate countries for loss and damages, especially the ones that are most immediately impacted. And again, there was nothing in Paris very specific about that. So it appears that there's a lot of backpedaling going on in these areas, which are going to be crucial to getting any type of serious voluntary commitment on the parts of these countries to do a larger share in the heavy lifting that's going to be necessary to put this thing through, to get anywhere near even 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. Is this going to be a sticking point, these kinds of issues that vague promises have been made of, but no specific proposals further have come out of them?
Well, I happen to agree with you. The equity and fairness in all of this is really important, and promises have been made and not delivered on. That's something the whole environmental community worldwide was made as a top priority in the negotiations, and I'm not going to stand here and represent that the progress was great. There were billions of dollars pledged, but a lot of it was from money that already was going to go. So I'm not going to disagree with you. I agree.
Hi, my name is Libby. I'm a MIT Sloan student and heavily involved in the Energy Club, so thank you for mentioning. You mentioned that the scientific background for the Clean Power Plan is key to it sort of surviving. Is there a scientific analysis or maybe economic analysis that's needed to get an emissions cap, like you mentioned, or other type of emissions trading scheme through Congress, or is it purely a political issue?
I wish that the merits had more to do in the American political system than they do. But I would say, sure, there's going to be economic analysis and scientific analysis that's needed to justify different proposals. And there will be some senators and congressmen who look at them, and there will be probably more interest in the technical background by journalists, and the journalists can influence public opinion. But at the end of the day, I don't want to overstate that. We need to get 60 votes in the Senate and a majority in the House for long-term carbon reductions, putting a price on carbon. And right now, for the first time since 2010, I can see momentum building. And so there's reason for us to begin to do the scientific work and the technical work, and above all, the political work to make that window, to pry the window of opportunity open. And EDF is hard at work. We're organizing on college campuses a program we call Defend Our Future, which is aimed at getting more millennials to vote. We noticed that people under the age of 35 really tend to care about climate, 85%. So if we can get more folks to come out and vote, with that being a key issue, that'll make a big difference. We're working with moms. We have something we call the Moms Clean Air Force. Now has almost 750,000 members. A whole series of mothers using social media, blogging to talk to their friends and their networks. It's powerful. It's run by Dominique Browning, and it's coveted by politicians who, Christina Figueres in Paris was proudly displaying her Mom's Clean Air Force button, and American politicians for sure. So we are beginning to mobilize the constituencies to put political pressure on our elected officials, and even to participate in who gets elected, because ultimately the science and the economics can get us so far, but what these politicians, their market isn't actually even in dollars or campaign contributions, it's in votes. And we have to show that people who care about this issue are going to show up and vote, and then we have a much better chance of getting what we need to get through Congress.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric. Run a small consultancy called Cambridge Energy Advisors. This is a question, kind of a good follow-up, actually. I think there's, a pretty good case to be made for states leading the way on new policies, particularly this state in recent years with marriage equality and healthcare access. So with regards to carbon pricing, we have a pretty good bill that's up in the Senate right now, 1747, which calls for a carbon fee and rebate, revenue neutral, basically based on the British Columbia model. And I think there's 46 co-sponsors, so it's pretty popular. But I think the key is getting businesses, and particularly big ones, to back it. And they sometimes make the argument that, well, it's not a federal policy, or we don't like to endorse state policies. But I think there's a pretty good precedent for them doing that. I guess the question embedded there is, are there things that EDF and other large environmental organizations can do to get some of these companies that have internal carbon prices and have already made these kinds of commitments to say, you know what, let's start in the states. Let's start, a couple of states at a time. Massachusetts isn't the only state, but is that something that we can get help to? And I'm just doing this as an advocate. I don't work there, so thanks.
In addition to millennials and moms, it's a fact of life in our political system that companies too have political power. And so yes, EDF has organized with the Natural Resources Defense Council and the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club and others, companies in, say, California to support their AB 32, their Climate Change Act. I don't know that I'm not going to stand here and promise you that we're going to help in Massachusetts and then not deliver, but we have resources in selected states to move policy. We are beginning to have conversations with companies at a national scale, because if we could do it for the whole nation, it's hard to imagine we get carbon pricing in Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, and so doing it, there's a virtue doing it nationally. But I haven't looked at that bill, but those state efforts in the meantime, until the window opens, or until we pry the window open, nationally, those state efforts in general are really important.
Thank you. Take a look at the bill.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is John Currier. I work here at MIT. I wonder if you could talk a bit about efforts in certain Western states to eliminate this, or at least limit subsidies for home photovoltaic systems. I guess that's based on the idea that if homeowners can sell the power they generate back to the grid at retail prices, it undermines traditional funding for the electric grid and leaves it short-funded. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, you're referring to what's happened in Nevada, where the net metering has been repealed and tens of thousands of people that were installing solar energy systems have been put out of work or moved to other states. You know, we've got a huge problem in this country that the laws regulating the grid are, you know, leftover relics from Thomas Edison's era, and a lot of them are designed to protect the status quo incumbent utilities. And the whole system needs a wholesale change, and it's only going to happen actually state by state. So this is an area that in Massachusetts, in New York, in every state, you know, we should be really diving in. The Environmental Defense Fund, you know, has begun that, but a place like MIT, I spent the afternoon meeting with some of your professors. You have enormous resources here to help, and, you know, it's really important. The crazy laws we have in places like Florida, the Sunshine State, that make it illegal for third parties to put solar panels on your home and provide you with solar panel. You know, this thicket of regulations to stop the penetration of distributed energy has to be cleared away. And I think it's an issue where, I talked about the elephant in the room, I think this is an issue where Republicans and Democrats can make common cause, because the idea of big businesses having monopoly power is no better liked by Republicans than Democrats or independents. I think we all should want energy freedom and the ability to have our own distributed resources. So I see opportunities for progress on that issue.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexei Radul. I work here at MIT as a research engineer on advancing technology for computer modeling and machine learning. And I was wondering whether you have any thoughts about how that kind of progress could help.
The progress in computer modeling?
Yeah. So computationally modeling various complex systems. I don't know, do you have, I read on your website that you have a scientific and economic staff. Are they limited by the ability of the kinds of models they can make, for instance?
Well, absolutely. So I just don't know where to start, because there's so many ways that models can contribute. It's hard to know where to begin, but we're working in China with Tsinghua University on modeling all sorts of questions of modeling and modeling assumptions to try to come to help Chinese modelers to come to a set of solid modeling assumptions. We're involved in exercising modeling how different pricing of tariffs would affect the electric grid. So there's lots of ways that modeling will help.
So how do you set the price of carbon in these emissions trading schemes? Because my understanding, the EU emissions trading scheme had a relatively modest effect because the price of carbon was set too low. So how would you avoid that?
Well, in an emissions trading scheme, you don't set the price of carbon. The market sets it. What you do is
set it through the allocation of credits, right?
Through how scarce are the credits, supply and demand. So what the Europeans want to do, what the Europeans could do, and what we and others have recommending they do if they want a higher price, is lower the cap, and that would give them the higher price. One thing that, there's advantages to carbon tax, there's advantage to cap and trade. One advantage of cap and trade is that when you set a cap and you have an economic downturn or a recession, there's less demand and the price automatically gets lower. It's kind of like a shock absorber in the system. But the Europeans, if they want a higher price, need to lower the cap. You know, the idea that, you know, my diagnosis of the European system is after a lot of early hiccups and failure to collect good data on what the baseline should be, the system now is working a lot better. Some say the low price of carbon is, you know, a huge problem because there's not enough of an incentive for clean energy. I would say, you know, the problem there is the cap, and the anticipation of a lower cap in the future isn't there, and that would give you a higher price. But in the end, when you have the cap set at good scientifically determined levels, if the price is low, hallelujah. Because I'm not here to advocate for sticking it to consumers or high prices. I'm here to solve the climate problem. And I love the idea of low prices to consumers because of technological innovation or smart regulations. You know, that's why having a steeply declining cap that gives incentives for entrepreneurs to grind down the costs of lowering pollution using the market and what has organized capitalism to be so effective, let's use that market to solve this problem. And so low costs, we should be careful. Yes, the costs are too low in Europe. You and I agree. But I would say it's because the cap isn't high enough. And at the end of the day, if we've got isn't low enough, at the end of the day, if we end up with low costs but we solve the problem, 2 thumbs up from me.
Yeah, hi, my name is Paul Strickler. I've been an investor in renewables and largely solar for about 15 years now.
Thank you.
And, well, so over 15 years, my position sort of evolved. I've seen countries like Germany invest a lot in solar and wind and basically bankrupt the utilities, drive up rates for consumers. And so you're talking about tax, and it sort of segues in with your comment before. This all costs money, and most of that cost is being borne by middle class and lower class people whose electric bills are a large portion of their income. And most of the benefits are accruing to tax equity investors like Google and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, and to utilities who can rate base these huge projects or just offset the cost of net metering. So Solar City installs a system on someone's roof. The neighbor without solar is basically picking up the bill as the utility just redirects the costs. I guess, how do you advocate for a sort of transformational as opposed to sort of a decentralized or smaller transition when the cost of that's going to be borne by the people that can least afford it? It just seems, I don't know, antithetical to sort of the organic nature of the cause. It just seems like there's something, and I've seen it happen in other countries as well in my 15 years, and something just seems off about that here in the US, what's happening now.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and the equities involved here are really, really important, and that's why, depending on the penetration rate, it's possible to put an unfair burden on homeowners. And so you do need a transformation of the regulation system. And I can't stand up here and give you all the components of an answer. I know, you know, dynamic pricing, where the energy is being generated, where it's going to be used, all has to be taken into account, and so does equity.
but just EDF's general point of view. I've read your website. You've been obviously a celebrity in the industry. What you advocate for is without a doubt going to be more than just a carbon tax. It's going to be a humongous tax on effectively the poor. And I guess there's just something about that doesn't, I don't know, resonate with me, someone who's deployed millions of dollars in this space for all these years, seen countries make tremendous mistakes how they subsidize their renewable energy. And there might be a right way to do it, but the way that you're proposing, we've seen that act before, and it frightens me a little bit that we're going to really just really put a humongous burden on people that can least afford it.
Well, my email is just fred@edf.org, and I'd welcome you to point me to any part of our website that shows what we're proposing, because I'm not aware that we've proposed anything specific. But I absolutely acknowledge that your point about equity and fairness and not socking it to the poor is important, and that's why my answer a minute ago talked about the goal is not high cost. The goal is squeezing carbon out.
My name's Howard Bernstein. I've heard a lot about the energy supply and the energy technologies. I've heard little or nothing about demand for energy, which comes in which has several components to it. One is the things we use energy for and how efficiently we use the energy forms that we have. And the other is how many people are enjoying certain levels of lifestyle and how many are not and would like to. So I wanted to ask, and one other thing is that last point has to do with the population, which continues to grow. And as population grows, it needs not only more energy, but more water, more food, more clean air. And I don't know how it works that you can simply get there by changing energy sources. I mean, I know that you know that we need a lot of energy efficiency, and that we need incentives for that. But what is it that you would that EDF does, or what is it that you would have EDF do that would address the supply side and the population of people requiring that supply, acknowledging that you cannot do everything, of course, and that other mainstream environmental organizations tend to avoid touching population. What do you see people at MIT doing or at EDF doing that to help either as partners or directly?
Good question. And I note your attempt to preempt my answer that we can't do everything. But the truth is, on population, I can't think of what EDF could do that would be effective or contribute to the problem. A decade or so ago, we did write a paper, a scientific paper, it's peer-reviewed and published, that pointed to the relationship that you're pointing to between population and emissions. But, there's other organizations and forces in our society that have a lot more skills and ability to impact population than we do.
Certainly.
On prosperity, the idea that more people are going to want to enjoy the modern conveniences, absolutely, and we are all for that. We're never going to want to put a cap on human aspirations. As to efficiency, another omission in my talk, I can't get to everything in 20 minutes, but I should have mentioned efficiency. We have a major effort within our clean energy work on energy efficiency, and it's really, really important. One of the things we're doing both in Europe and the United States is an investor confidence project to try to get more private capital flowing to projects by standardizing them and giving more definition to the metrics of how you measure energy savings. So those are really important questions, and thank you for asking them.
Sure.
We'll go to one last question.
Sure.
I was going to ask something similar, which is the predictions of energy use. I saw a McKinsey report, I think, just this last week that said, we're currently 17 terawatts. By mid-century, if we're conservative, we probably need something like 40 or 50. And so if you start trying to calculate renewable resources, McKinsey takes a pretty dim view of it. They think that fossil fuels are still going to be the dominant energy source well into the 2050s or something. I'm an architect here at MIT, and we ran this Solve conference, and I was focusing on buildings and the sort of problem of building. We anticipate a doubling of buildings on the planet by 2050. Just the embodied energy of the current ways we build buildings would seem to me to be a critical factor in its energy consumption. Buildings use 30 to 40% of energy, but if you consider their actual building, it's probably going to be about 50% of the building used in this next period of expansion and of development. Something like 50% of the housing on the planet is informal, so legislation seems to be an ineffective vehicle. Taxation seems an ineffective vehicle. So I put it to you that there has to be a massive other focus, which is on something like radically lightweighting buildings, developing new material paradigms, because the energy production side of things just isn't, and the legislative vehicles don't seem to be adequate to address, that. What do you think? What would you say to that? It seems.
Well, first of all, you're depressing me. But we've got a lot of problems, and the fact that the planet's going to undoubtedly use more and more energy is one of them. The fact that we need to build a lot of new buildings is true. One advantage of putting a price on carbon is that when we make cement, if we have a price on carbon where cement is being made, it gives you a big incentive to find a way to make it without the same amount of emissions. And there's some research being done. I know at Imperial, probably here at MIT, about whole new ways to make building materials. So, I just would end Q&A where I ended my talk, that if there's one policy, not the only policy, it's not a silver bullet, but one policy that will have more effect than any other, it is making these externalities internal by putting a price on our pollution. Thank you all.
Thank you.